Welcome to the Home Business Podcast with Richard Captain Henderson, publisher of Home Business Magazine, and Sherilyn Colleen, managing editor. This how-to show helps you successfully operate your home-based business.
Greetings and welcome to the Home Business Podcast. I'm Richard Captain Henderson, your skipper at Home Business TV.
And I'm Lynn, your co-host.
Let's skipper see and get underway. Millennials are growing to be the largest work-from-home demographic group. Although I've aged out, my co-host is here to help.
Yes, with the right steps and tactics, millennials can build their entrepreneurial skills to become millionaires.
In today's podcast, we'll discuss millennials, personal finance, branding, and how to become a successful entrepreneur from scratch.
Joining us today is Brian Cadorna, author of Millennial, Millionaire, A Guide to Become a Millionaire by 30, and host of the Cadorna podcast.
So let's help our millennial entrepreneurs. Brian Cadorna, please say hello to our audience.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me on the show, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on our show.
So thanks for connecting in from Jersey?
Yes, sir. Yeah, the Jersey Shore.
Cool.
Great. Brian, how does a millennial entrepreneur differentiate themselves with so much competition and noise out there?
Yep. So that's a great question. I think it is definitely a very crowded space, with the obviously the advent of the internet and social media, and there is a lot of noise out there. So a lot of the things I teach, especially young entrepreneurs and millennials, is how do you want to differentiate yourself? And I think you have to kind of go back to basics and say, okay, what are some of the things where you can connect with your audience? For myself in the financial advisory space, I like to try and have as much of a personal connection as I can with my clients. So oftentimes I'm doing seminars, I'm doing lunches, doing dinners, things like that where they actually see me and get to know who I am. Then once I've made that initial impact with my prospective customer or client, that's when, now that they have that impression of me, now I can kind of work out in the space of the internet. And that's where I constantly want to surround my clients, whether it's with emails, my book, the podcast, social media, so that now it seems like, even though maybe I've only known them for a month or two, or that they were a referral, it seems like I'm very kind of, relevant and in front of them on a consistent and regular basis, which I think develops a nice level of comfort. And then it's much easier for me to kind of segue into a financial conversation now that kind of their guard's down and they've gotten used to seeing my face, hearing my voice and kind of knowing who I am. So I would say, that's something that millennials need to focus on, is taking advantage of technology, but also not forgetting, that personal touch.
So kind of in a nutshell, there's so many different channels, primarily through the internet, but also some can be, visual and networking, where you can reach your clientele. And instead of focusing on niching in, homing in on one specific channel, you've got to focus on hitting all of them with good content that reinforces your brand and your image with those prospective clients.
Exactly right. And I think that last word you mentioned there, brand, is just so important. And that's ultimately what develops, I think, that comfort and that level of, credibility, whether it's deserved or not, but that, perception becomes reality. So if they see it enough, they get used to it. Now they're comfortable with your brand, and it just gives that message of yours so much more power.
I don't know what you think about this, but I've heard sometimes your brand is sort of like the emotion that's triggered when somebody thinks about you or, sees you. Then it's like it's triggering some kind of an emotional response that somebody won't even really think about, what exactly is the deal with this person. It's more having, a profession, they're professional or whatever, the branding has to be almost subconscious. What do you think about that?
That's that wasn't even something I was thinking of addressing, but it's a very real point. And something along those lines, for instance, it took me a long time before I got comfortable connecting with clients of mine on social media and on Facebook. And then when eventually I said, I really want to build relationships, that's what business is all about, I began connecting with all these folks. They were all adding me as a friend. And I think they got kind of a glimpse of who I was beyond just a professional, as they saw, pictures of me traveling or spending time with my wife or with the kids and going surfing or cruising and hiking. And all of a sudden, going back to your point of emotions, I think they said when they hear the name Brian, it's, that guy that, he knows finance.
It's a positive emotion, a professional emotion. And
it makes you more human. Yep.
Well, Brian, what are some of the biggest issues, mistakes, and opportunities millennial entrepreneurs are facing?
So there are a lot of ways to answer that. I think not maybe one of the biggest mistakes, but one of the biggest worries they have is the student loan epidemic right now. So a lot of millennials, a lot of folks in their 20s, 30s, around that age range, they're coming out of college with unprecedented debt. They're finding it's taking a while for them to kind of discover what their passion is, what their calling is. And so they're starting their career much later than prior generations. And they're getting, again, a late start with a lot of debt, which creates a lot of financial pressure. So lots of times they're not able to say, I want to be this entrepreneur, I want to go that route. They're just taking whatever job that they can so that they can start paying these bills that they have. So I think that's one of the threats. And I think on the front end, obviously millennials are getting out of college all done, but you really need to think about kind of the upcoming wave of, are there efficient ways to go through college financially? And for those that are already out of college, they need to come up with a financial plan quickly of how to, handle that debt so that they can achieve some level of financial freedom and start pursuing, whatever their passion is, as opposed to just being a worker, but now being an entrepreneur.
I've heard that multiple times that this debt, these levels of college debt are an impediment to entrepreneurial activity because people have to take the less risky route of getting an income, a regular job and an income flow just so they could pay the interest off on the, debt. So that's a good point you bring up.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a struggle. So, but I think, hopefully, they can get past that early on in their career. Maybe sometimes they're living at home a little bit longer than they wanted, just to kind of build up some of their liquidity to pay down some of these debts and just be responsible with their money. And, I always say time is our biggest asset. So if young professionals recognize that and get off on the right foot, then they don't need to worry as much and they can have those entrepreneurial options available to them.
Well, Brian, please talk about some of the key points in your book that can help you become a millionaire by 30.
Yep. Yeah. So again, my book, Millennial, Millionaire, the subtitle there, I always do preface this. It could be a bit misleading of how to become a millionaire by 30. Because a lot of what I preach to my clients isn't any get rich quick scheme. I really do kind of propose financial planning for the long haul. Having said that, if you do want to become a millionaire by 30, it really is going to take, a quick start, which means that we can't go to school for, 5 years instead of 4, and then just go to graduate school because we don't know what to do next. And then when we get out of graduate school, kind of peruse around until we somehow find a job that comes our way. I think you have to be extremely ambitious and chomping at the bit to get out of school, get into the workforce, and then climb that ladder. And as you're doing so, you need to save aggressively. And I don't mean necessarily be aggressive with your investments, but I mean the bulk of your surplus has to go into savings or investment or retirement vehicles to get a head start. And then you could certainly, once you have kind of that foundation in play, look into maybe getting into real estate, getting into opening a business, other ventures like that once we have that foundation set. So
you're talking about, you got to have some discipline that sometimes is not there when you're in your early 20s. It just brings me back, I was back in there and kind of like, what do I do? And undisciplined. I ended up in the Navy and goofing off. But I remember even coming into the Navy as a younger junior officer, there was one that was there and totally driven the way you are and focused, and it was taking his money and investing it wisely. And he was approaching 30 and was at that time had $1 million portfolio. So, I mean, no matter what situation you're in, what career path you've chosen, I think it kind of comes down to, it's not necessarily what the career path is, but you have the right mindset and that you're focused on, the time is short and you've got to, maximize what your approach.
Definitely. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's not, I always tell people, it's not, necessarily easy, but it is relatively simple. There's not this just kind of magic formula to get there. There's nothing mystical and magical. Really, it's a lot of hard work. And I always tell people, if you want to have more money, you either have to cut your expenses or you have to make more money. So that's where you kind of have to either tighten the belt, or maybe we're in the gig economy now. Maybe you start to kind of pick up some side hustles or some other things like that as you're climbing your way up, the corporate ladder until you can kind of set yourself free.
Yeah, I notice you're not talking about taking on more debt, to invest. So that's probably some smart advice not to give. Is like somebody say, well, take on, leverage yourself a little bit to go into this opportunity. That can create some risks and make it harder over the long term.
Yeah, I mean, leverage can be a great wealth multiplier, but it can also be very dangerous. So that's where I think liquidity is kind of the precursor to that. And there's good debt and there's bad debt. And young professionals got to get very acquainted with what is what and be able to tell the difference between the two.
Well, let's focus a little bit more on the younger millennials. Brian, what advice would you give to a recent college grad?
To a recent college grad, I would say find a job ASAP. If they haven't already done an internship, which hopefully they have, I think that's the quickest thing, is just kind of diving into the workforce. Because I've even a lot of my friends have kind of fallen prey to finding this beautiful vision of kind of being at the mountaintop. And you got to realize that you don't just start there. You don't just get that dream job. You got to sometimes pick through a lot of weeds before you find the roses. And so I think that the sooner you can kind of take those lumps, that old saying of fail fast, the quicker they're going to kind of figure out how the world works and begin to get a little more control of their own future. So I think that would be my number one thing, is just to, go at whatever it is that they have their heart set on, just attack and go for it right out the gates, and don't keep waiting for that perfect opportunity.
Now, a couple of things there, like 20 or 30 years ago, this advice would be to go find a company, a good company, and, start climbing up the wall. I hear what you're saying is find a job that's a good fit for you, for your skills. If that means moving around from company to company, don't be hesitant about doing that.
Yeah, that's true. You don't ever want to get stuck in a rut. I mean, me personally, like I fell into a financial advising role, and fortunately with an independent company that gave me an entrepreneurial opportunity. But along the side, I have a lot of other passions. So I was able to manage my practice and my day job, if you will, at the same time as I was writing my book through a lot of my 20s, and now eventually launching my podcast. So I'm doing a lot of other things that I enjoy, of kind of communicating and writing and taking on all those endeavors at the same time, kind of managing my day-to-day, which is financial advising.
Well, Brian, let's get to know you better. How has sports and completing an international Ironman affected your business?
Yeah, so I think sports have just taught me so many life lessons, from all the way back in Pop Warner through high school and college. It teaches you a lot of time management, especially in college, playing football and having your classes and a job and all those things. I think it forces you to mature very quickly. And it's also kind of taught me that things don't come easy, that you do have to kind of earn your way. And so that when I came into this business, like any entrepreneur will realize, there's going to be a lot of failures. There's going to be a lot of hurdles. And so I think, understanding that's just kind of a part of the game, which I had already realized through sports, it helped me kind of endure that and not get too rattled. As far as doing the Ironman, I mean, that was an awesome opportunity, an awesome way to kind of challenge myself. And it took me away a lot. It added more balance in a way to my work and my personal life. And a lot of people said, how are you training for an Ironman, doing all that crazy stuff and still running a business? And my answer, it was actually a little bit easier in a way, because it got me so detached from the everyday work that when I went back to the office, I was like fully ready to go and totally renewed.
That must take a lot of timely upfront prep to get ready. I mean, it must be planning, a year out to do an Ironman like that.
Yeah, I think it was a New Year's resolution. So it was January 1st, and then I did the Ironman on August 15th. So wow. It was a good 5 months of kind of peak training, I would say.
Cool. What position did you play in college ball?
Yep, I played safety.
All right. Well, that'll get the discipline going. Well, how did you build a practice as a 21-year-old with no natural market?
Yeah, so that was probably the biggest of all challenges. And it's funny, because when I was in college, I just helped my buddy out one time on Christmas break, took up a job with him where we were telemarketers, which was like the worst thing I could have imagined doing. But then you fast forward, I graduated and I wasn't afraid to get on the phone. And I was taught early on, that the phone is your hammer and you're a carpenter. So you get very comfortable. And what I did, long story short, I was cold calling at times. I was going to every networking event you could possibly find in the state, just to show up and meet people that were a little bit more established. And then I started to kind of work off of a lot of those referrals and those contacts eventually to create like a seminar circuit, primarily throughout hospitals, doing a lot of workshops and seminars. And that became kind of my feeder system to what is now my practice and all my clients.
Well, I got to bring out what you said about talking on the phone. I mean, I think as we get more lost in email and the internet, when you do have the opportunity to, to get on the phone and make that, that voice connection, take advantage of it.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. I think, the best is being face-to-face, shaking hands. Next would be on the phone. And then the last one, we always say mail to fail. Last is going to be your emailing and your texting and stuff like that. You don't build as much a connection. But obviously, some people prefer that mode of communication. So if you can be good at all three, then, you're able to capture a lot of different markets.
You ever try to, I know it's creeping in more into the way of marketing, but to try to use a short video or put a video clip in an email or try to network by video with people, or have you just not seen that yet?
It's something, I personally haven't excelled at. I mean, I have like a marketing company that does my newsletter and also does send out like a monthly video. So that's kind of the extent of it. But where I'm really now kind of doing what you just mentioned is with my podcast. And I just started the Caderna podcast about 2 months ago. It's audio and visual, so I'm able to kind of blast that out everywhere. And that certainly has given me a lot of exposure.
That's your video right there.
Well, let's talk about your podcast. What's it all about?
Sure. So it's called the Caderna Podcast, and it's just a dialogue. I always tell people it's a dialogue on finance, business, and self-help. So far, a lot of it has been on a personal finance, how to kind of develop a financial plan, work towards a better tomorrow, if you will. And now we have a number of guests lined up. And so that's going to be the format, is kind of a back and forth of some episodes will just be 20-minute segments of some financial tips or business tips. And others will have some kind of icons in business or in sports, like next week, that we'll have on the show, where it'll be a longer, maybe hour-long interview of me from kind of financial business angle and going through some of their experiences just to get another vantage point.
Well, Brian Caderna, this has been a great discussion on being a millennial entrepreneur. Do you have any final points you would like to share?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on the show. I think the big thing, just everybody, if you can get out there and work hard, if you have some failures along the way, don't be deterred by them. And please go check out my book, which again, it's called Millennial Millionaire. I'll hold that up real quick. It's probably the most boring cover you've ever seen. We call it the white book.
Well, don't judge a book by its cover.
So again, that's Millennial Millionaire. And please tune into the Caderna podcast, which is available anywhere you'd listen to podcasts today.
Brian Caderna, thank you for being such a wonderful guest on the Home Business Podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
To learn more about Brian Caderna and his book, Millennial Millionaire, A Guide to Become a Millionaire by 30, visit Amazon or our podcast website for more information on guests.
Thanks for joining us in this episode of the Home Business Podcast. Share your feedback with us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and at our website, homebusinessmag.com.
Visit the website for information on advertising, subscribe to our newsletter. Please visit our sponsors. For more information, visit homebusinessmag.com or the expo at homebusinessexpo.com.
I'm Richard Captain Henderson saying anchors away.
We'll talk with you soon. Until then,
make it a great home-based biz day.